What's up, everybody? In this video, I'm going to give you the 3 translations I think you should be reading from and why. And we're going to start right now. So this question comes up a lot, especially for those of us that are around Bibles, although a lot of that is Bible reviews, just looking at the physical Bible and covers and pages and paper. That ends up turning into what translation should I be reading? And I'm going to give you what I think are kind of my top 3. But let's explain a little bit where we're coming from when it comes to that. And that's, you got to know the difference between a formal equivalent and a dynamic equivalent. So when you're looking at Bibles and which Bible should I read, there's really 2 camps. There's a third camp, paraphrases, and we'll mention that here in just a minute. But the formal equivalent would be as close to word for word as possible. Now, I say as close to word for word as possible because there is no such thing as a word for word translation from, say, Greek into English or Hebrew into English. So you need to go into it knowing that, because that's going to help you understand dynamic equivalents. The reason that is because for those of you who speak more than one language, you know that there are oftentimes words that we may have in English that you don't have in that language, or vice versa. So we have to do our best to capture with more than one word, a word that means something different to you. So you can't actually have a word for word. That being said, the formal equivalents and the translators who have translated that from Hebrew and Greek, and there's a little Aramaic, just a teeny bit, and have done a fantastic job. And one of the reasons why there are so many translations is because we continue to learn. Hebrew is a real gut language. It's a real emotional language. And so to capture what they mean and what they thought, the more we study the culture and the more we learn from that in archaeology, the more we're better able to understand the original texts in the Hebrew. And that's the same way with Greek. That being said, I don't particularly think that we need 100,000 translations. I really don't. We keep adding them. But alas, I'll digress on that because we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So let me give you a couple of honorable mentions here first. And the first honorable mention I would give would be the LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible. I like the Legacy Standard Bible. And for those of you who are wondering, no, the New American Standard Bible doesn't make my list. I know that's going to make some people upset. But since we're talking about it, the Legacy Standard Bible is an offshoot. Can I use the word offshoot here? It stems from or comes from the New American Standard Bible. For those of you who don't know, the Legacy Standard Bible is kind of John MacArthur's people's project, and there were some words and some ideas in Scripture that he thought were better translated in certain ways. So they kind of designed and translated the Legacy Standard Bible. That comes from the New American Standard Bible. And for those of you who don't know, the New American Standard Bible is pretty widely known as the most accurate word-for-word translation. Now, the trouble I personally have with the New American Standard Bible is twofold. One, for me, it gets a little clunky. And that's because word order, grammatical syntax, when you translate word for word, can get a little tricky. It's hard to keep it in the original, because in English we have like subject and predicate. Well, it doesn't always go that way in other languages, so it can get a little confusing. That's all. The number 2 reason is because I just don't particularly like the 2020 text edition. I don't think they're taking that in the right direction, but that's just me. That's just my own opinion, and I think the Legacy Standard Bible is going to be staying true to the text and not worrying about kind of inclusive text wording and stuff like that, because I know that John MacArthur is not going to allow that, at least while he's around. So the Legacy Standard Bible gets an honorable mention. I definitely keep that. If I didn't hook up my iPad here today, but when I'm really studying a text, I have a couple of different screens open, and the LSB is one of those. But let's get to the actual top 3 here, and I'm going to give you the top 2 at the same time, because these are formal equivalent texts that I really like, and that would be the New King James Version or the ESV, the English Standard Version. Now, I personally am an English Standard Version guy. And here's the story on the ESV and how I came to that, how I came to this conclusion. Years and years ago, more than a decade ago, when I really started to study my faith, and I grew up, by the way, in a church. I grew up with the Bible and knowing kind of all the stuff in it. I just didn't always know what it meant, and we didn't talk about doctrine per se. So I read the NIV most of my life, which most of the world, by the way, does. Okay. But I really started to study my faith, and I really thought to myself, why am I reading the NIV? I know there are more than one translation. Which should I be reading? The NIV, the NLT? Those are like the two that I knew about at the time, the New American Standard Bible. So I emailed a whole bunch of, I did this, which is funny. I guess I was a little tenacious back in the day. I emailed every pastor and professor that I could get their email addresses to. Oftentimes you can log into a school like Biola. My guess is you can do the same thing with Al Mohler and Boyce. That doesn't mean they're going to read them. But I went and got their staff email addresses and emailed them. This is who I am. This is why I'm asking you this question. Which Bible translation should I be reading? There wasn't as much YouTube presence back then. This was more than 10 years ago. So there weren't guys like me making videos that tell you what translation to read. Well, I got emails back from a lot of them. And a lot of them said, number one, the translation that you will read, that's the best one. And I didn't like that answer. But it's true. And I give that answer to a lot of people now. If you think the NASB is the best and your NASB is going to sit right here on the shelf and never be read, then that's not a good translation for you. We need to start somewhere else, right? But they also followed that up with a short explanation of dynamic and formal equivalents and what they liked and what they read. Most of them were New American Standard Bible if they were professors and theologians. But the ESV was right up there, and it was kind of a choose your own adventure here as far as which one is better. It wasn't a which one is better, it's a which one you prefer. So I read them both, and I ended up choosing the ESV. I'm glad I did, because it turns out the ESV and Crossway puts out the ESV, has a whole lot of options out there. I know that's funny, but the Lockman Foundation puts out the New American Standard Bible, and there are very few different New American Standard Bibles. And what I mean by that is cover types, font sizes, study Bible type of information in that. There's very few because they didn't license out the New American Standard Bible. And with the ESV, you can get single column, double column, verse by verse format, large print, small print, compact. And that's important. You need to be able to physically read the Bible, that you're reading in order to sit down and actually do it on a regular basis. So that's a whole long story I turned out to be an ESV guy. Well, then I ended up going to a church that taught and preached out of the New King James Version and ended up really falling in love with it. The New King James Version is a really solid text, and I think that it's valuable for studying from. So that's what I want you to know about my top two here, is that the ESV and the NKJV are valuable for study. Why do I word it that way? Because in this guy's opinion, this is my opinion, and your opinion might be different, and that's okay. We need to be studying the Bible from a formal equivalent because we need to have as close to the original text as possible. The reason is because in a dynamic equivalent Bible, the translators have done some or a lot of the work for you, meaning they've taken a word and then based on what they think that it means, that's what they write down. Now, what I don't want you to hear me say is that the Bible is what they think that it means. It just means they've done some of the hard work. They've done some of the word studies for you, and you're going to get kind of their idea on that. When it comes to a formal equivalent, you see a word that you don't know or an idea or a thought that you're struggling with. Your job as a Christian is to go study that, and having a formal equivalent is, again, in my opinion, going to be better for that. So my top two would be the New King James Version and the ESV. I personally read and study out of the ESV. My church now is back, not back, but I am back to the English Standard Version. My church teaches and preaches out of the ESV. Works out really good for me because would be my favorite translation. And I think that it's a really valuable, really valid translation that not only is really, really close to word for word, it's easy to read. They've switched around some of those word issues, subject, predicate, kind of issues that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which makes it quite a bit easier and quite a bit nicer to read. So I'll save the third one here, and this one is relatively new to the list. I do these videos from time to time because I get this question a lot. And the third translation is a translation that I feel like is an underdog for lack, and I don't know why. Maybe it's new enough that people don't know about it, or it's new enough that people just don't think about it all that often, and that would be the CSB. I mention the CSB from time to time. That's the Christian Standard Bible. For those of you who have been around for a while, it used to be called the HCSB, the Holman CSB, right? But I really like the CSB text, and I think that it's a fantastic text for a couple of different reasons. Let me tell you what those reasons are. For new believers, okay, people that are kind of new to the faith, stick them in the CSB. Read through the Bible in the CSB. For if you want to sit down and read at length, if you want to read a big chunk of scripture all at one time, it might be a little bit more pleasurable to read through the CSB. I mean, a couple of chapters, 3, 4, 5, 6 chapters at a time. Maybe if you are doing studies, and I just made a video that mentioned this, like how to study the Bible, you're going to want to read through the book. Say you're studying 1 Peter. You want to read through 1 Peter 4 or 5 or 6 times, all the way through, like, one full time a day. And maybe the first couple of times you read it, you want to do that in the CSB. Okay. So what is the CSB? Because it's a little easier to read. Well, it's funny you should ask, because I mentioned dynamic equivalence and I mentioned formal equivalence, and I prefer formal equivalence. The CSB, when I got my first CSB, I read the beginning, like I tell you all to do. The first few pages, the translation philosophy, and they called it an optimal equivalence. Now, I don't know who coined this term, but I didn't like that. I thought, well, who are they to call this an optimal equivalence? Because optimal is a big word. And then I read it like all the way through, cover to cover, a couple of times. And you know what? I kind of agree with them. Now, again, I still prefer the ESV or the New King James Version because it's a formal equivalent text, but it's pretty optimal. And the reason that I say that is because it's not a dynamic equivalent. It's not thought for thought. It kind of falls in the middle, and I would say in the middle towards the formal equivalent side of the conversation. So where it might be hard to understand certain thoughts, certain words, certain ideas, I think they've done a really good job of translating the thought and transmitting those thoughts to us. It still errs on the side of formal equivalence, but is very easily readable. So for some that say, again, might be new to the faith, or they might be younger Christians, your teenagers, stick them in a CSB because they're still going to have to do some of the work. It still is on the side of kind of closer to the formal equivalent side, but it's not a dynamic equivalent. Now, I hope some of this information has helped you out, and I want to wrap up by saying this. I don't have a problem, I don't really have a problem with dynamic equivalence. I mentioned the NIV, the New International Version is the #1 selling and produced Bible of all time, #1 selling book for that matter, of all time. It is read in more places and in more countries than any other translation. It's #1 by the numbers. It's #1, and it's a valid Bible. If that's what you can get, if that's what you can have, great. You're not getting misinformation in that Bible. I just prefer formal equivalence because I want to do the work myself. Now, I mentioned that, and I used to do Bible reviews for the New Living Translation, but here at this channel, I really try to work hard to only review things in two camps, either that I'm going to highly recommend to you, such as, ESV, NKJV, and I just wouldn't recommend the NLT. I stopped being willing to do that, or reviewing things that I definitely would not recommend, and the NLT doesn't fall into that category either, because there's a tool for every job, and I just think that the New Living Translation, while it's valid, it falls closer to a paraphrase. there just is a lot of things that I don't like about it. And I don't choose it for myself. Now, some people use the NLT because it's very easy to read. It has broken down things a lot for you. And the quick version, I almost wasn't going to bring this up, but there's a word count usage in all these different translations. The last time I brought this up in a video, I got hollered at, and people, this has nothing to do with your education. I'm not calling you smart or not smart, okay? But this is how it works. So the vocabulary, the actual amount of words used in the New Living Translation is significantly less than in, say, the New American Standard Bible, which falls over here. Why is that important? Well, because the New American Standard Bible is written to like a 12th grade level understanding of things, and the New Living Translation is written more to like a 3rd or 4th grade level, and that has to do with the words, the actual words that are used, and how many of them. So again, this is not smart or not smart, but it's one of the things that makes it a little easier to read or a little not easier to read. Now, that's been a whole lot of information, but I hope that is all solid information. The top 3 Bibles that I think that you should be reading are the New King James Version, the English Standard Version, and the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. I think that's a very well-rounded set of translations to read for. Sure, you could have 24 different translations on your shelf. I think I have most of them now, but because I happen to review them for you guys, and there's a lot of legit translations out there. The Berean Standard Bible, the New English Translation, that would be the Net Bible. Okay, I could just rattle off letters and translations to you for the next 5 minutes, but sometimes too many choices are too many. So I want to break it down from you and say, if you're really a serious Bible student, which I think you should be because that's who you're claiming to be, if you're claiming to be a Christian, stick to 2 or 3 different translations. I think those translations should be NKJV, ESV, and CSB. That doesn't mean the rest are bad. I just think why not break it down into keeping it simple, right? Because you're going to get the Word of God. You're going to get it as close to word for word as possible. It's a great study tool. Not only that, but the companies that I mentioned, Thomas Nelson, NKJV, Crossway, which is ESV, and Holman, which is CSB, are putting out fantastic products. You know, if you watch this channel and watch the Bible reviews, that they have a lot of options to choose from for those of us that struggle with our vision and need a little bit bigger of a text, to those of us that want to be able to throw it in our backpack and can read little 6-point font, or with zipper, without zipper, wide margins to write in, good paper. You know, there's a lot of options to choose from, and that's important, because if you buy a Bible that's not comfortable to read, that hurts your eyes, you're just not going to sit down and do it all that often. One of the goals of these channels is to pair you up with those resources that is really going to get you into the Word and digging deep. I hope this information has helped. Hey, if you're new here to Claiming Christianity, we make Bible reviews, resource reviews, and Bible study videos, opening up that Bible to dig down deep inside and see what's in there to help encourage and equip us to be the Christians that we claim to be. So if that interests you, consider subscribing so you'll be kept up to date on all the content that's coming out. Thanks for hanging in there with me today. Don't forget, be the Christian you claim to be.